Hi, and thanks for tuning in and taking a listen to this interview. I'm Mark Simon, and during this call, I interview Brad Holland from the Illustrators Partnership, and we go over what's going on with the new Orphan Works legislation that's about to be released. This interview was recorded on Saturday, April 5th, 2008. That'll be important when we talk about what is happening, what's coming up, so regardless when you listen to it, you'll know what you can do. So sit back, take a listen. Hopefully this will get you all fired up because we need everybody to help out as much as possible to protect all of our works. Thank you, and good luck. All right, well, I'd like to welcome to this call Brad Holland. Brad is the, actually I'll let you introduce yourself on exactly what you do as an artist and what you do with the Illustrators Partnership.
Well, what I've been doing as an artist, I've been doing for 40 years. I've done time covers and record album covers from the day that they were record albums until the day they were CDs. I did Stevie Ray Vaughan's first album. I did Billy Joel, Ray Charles. So I've done a lot of work like that. I do posters. I've done gallery paintings. So I do a lot of things. About 7 years ago, we formed a group of us, C.F. Payne, Chris Payne, Dave Lesh, Dugald Sturmer, and I, in league with a lawyer named Bruce Lehman, who was used to be Commissioner of Patents and Trademarks to the United States government. We formed a group. We haven't got time to go into the actual agenda of the original IPA, but it turned into a kind of a neighborhood watch group. Operating on the premise that artists weren't getting very good representation in Washington or in all the changes that were occurring to the visual arts world. And in the process, we happened to be set up when the government introduced this Orphan Works legislation about 3 years ago. So we've taken the initiative in trying to explain what the bill is, how it's going to affect artists, and what we can do to try to stop it or change it in such a way that it doesn't damage visual artists, which, as it is now structured, is going to do.
Well, you know, I've seen and been getting all your emails about everything that you're doing to fight against this Orphan Works legislation. I personally, and on behalf of all other artists, thank you for all the work you've been doing. But for those who are not familiar with the term Orphan Works, how could you describe that to them?
It's a misnomer. That's the first way to describe it. It is not what it appears to be. It is, in effect, a Trojan horse. Let me explain this as simply as I can. Under current copyright law, everything you do, from a finished painting to a sketch in your sketchbook to your family snapshots, home videos, the doodles on the margins of your books, anything you do that is creative is protected by copyright from the moment you create it, whether it is registered or not. The days when you had to put a copyright C on it and sign your name and register it with the Copyright Office for protection disappeared 30 years ago with the introduction of the 1976 Copyright Act. That was an attempt to harmonize the United States with international copyright, which doesn't require registration of any kind. Now, there's a caveat. In current copyright law, you can't get statutory damages for infringement unless the work is registered with the Copyright Office. Mm-hmm. But basically, you have, shall we call it, passive copyright protection from the moment you do a picture, whether you register it or not. Under this Orphan Works legislation, nothing you do would be protected. Not a single thing. Not a sketch, not a finished picture, not a snapshot, not a home video. Nothing you do would be protected unless you registered it with a commercial registry. Now, these commercial registries don't even exist. The idea is they're going to change the law, in a sense, orphaning everything that you have ever done or that you ever will do unless you register the work with these so far non-existent registries, which they expect the private sector to pop up and supply.
So we have to pay to own our own work?
Yes. You would have to pay to own any work that you wanted to protect. Now, of course, if you didn't mind creating something and letting it sit and hope that nobody found it and infringed it, as the guy at the Copyright Office said, go ahead and be my guest. But if you want to protect anything you do for either commercial or just as a matter of protecting your own privacy, as a matter of protecting your own creative ideas, suppose you do a sketch and send it to, suppose you do a job for a client and send them 5 sketches. They pick one. You have to register the other 4 too, because there's no telling that the art director might let the sketch sit in a drawer. Somebody else could find it. It doesn't have a name on it. Suddenly it's their idea. It's their sketch. They can use it however they want. That would be the premise of this new Orphan Works legislation. In effect, it would literally orphan every work that you've ever done, including work that you've registered with the Copyright Office over the last 30 years. If you had already sent a registration to the Copyright Office and registered your work under this Orphan Works Bill, you'd still have to register it again with a commercial registry.
That's unbelievable. They're trying to get away with this.
And they're trying to do it on the premise that they are doing nothing more than freeing up old work. This is why it's deceptively named, why I've said it was a misnomer. They have convinced Congress that this will do nothing more than free up old work whose copyright owners have died or abandoned their copyrights. Right now, copyright exists for your life plus 70 years.
Right.
Let's say someone died 71 years ago. Let's do a different example. Let's say somebody died 50 years ago, but nobody has managed their copyrights for the last, say, 40 years. That copyright is still sitting, languishing literally in limbo for another 20 years before it's free to use. So in theory, what this bill is supposed to do is to say, hey, if you're a library or you're a museum and you have these old pictures and you want to use them but you don't know who did them, or you contact somebody and they don't return your phone call, under current copyright law they claim this work can't be used, so they need to change the law so that libraries and museums will be able to use it. Well, in theory, that's what this bill will do. But it'll do it by orphaning everybody's work. And then saying, okay, now anybody who wants to protect your copyrights has to start from scratch and start digitizing everything you've ever done and put it online so that it is searchable through a database.
Yeah.
Now, just think of the amount of money that you would have to spend and the amount of time you have to go through. I'm trying to digitize, my backlog just to put it online to register. And I've had an assistant working at this for a couple of years. We've only got up over, 1,000 or 1,000, 1,500 pictures. I've got tens of thousands of things once you count sketches, drawings and sketchbooks, doodles, all kinds.
There's no way
it'll never get done.
Yeah, we couldn't do it. I mean, I do about 5,000 pieces a year. And literally, we counted one year.
Okay.
It's because of storyboarding and comics and all that kind of stuff. When you go through a ton of art when we're doing this kind of stuff, there's no possible way that I could track this. I mean, I can barely keep up with the amount of work I've got now, much less having to deal with this nonsense.
Exactly. You're on very tight deadlines. Now, I've hired a guy to do this, so I've already paid somebody a couple $1,000, several $1,000 actually, to do this digitizing so far. Now, this would mean that I would be spending tens of thousands of dollars just to digitize my backlog, and that's before I have to pay the registries.
Right.
And we don't know what the registries would charge. Theoretically, they would charge a low fee to begin with.
Yeah, but low fee,
even
it's only $5 a piece or
$1
even
a dollar a picture.
Yeah. And then it's per registry.
Yeah.
So if there's 3 registries or 5 registries, that's 5 times what we'd have to pay.
Sure. Well, think of a sketchbook. A sketchbook maybe has 30, 40, 50 pages, maybe 100 pages or more. Do you register each page as you do a sketch on it, or do you wait till the book is filled up and hope nobody finds it and makes T-shirts out of all your sketches in the meantime?
Right. Yeah, it's unbelievable. Well, but besides us, I think this is going to affect companies too. Either they'll also lose money from unlicensed use of their work, which will leave them less money to hire us.
Right.
Or they'll just take our work and consider it orphaned and not pay us. Either way, we're the ones who are losing out.
Small companies will be hurt. Large companies like Disney. Is there anybody in the world who doesn't recognize a Disney character? Has Disney put out anything in the last 70 years that doesn't have a great big copyright Walt Disney Productions on it? Big corporations are well prepared to deal with the bill, and in fact, as you indicated, a lot of them will be using Orphan Works. Google has already said they plan to use millions of orphaned works when the works are available to them. And remember, each time someone orphans one of your pictures by putting it out there, that is now an entire family tree of orphans that can be picked up and used again by other people. So it has the effect of a hall of mirrors.
Well, yeah, and they could pull the orphan off of any one of the registries, regardless if you've already protected or registered somewhere else.
Sure.
So even if you've done the work, you could be orphaned.
Consider the abuse. Even if you've registered the work. Now, we have an example of Michiko Sterenberger, who did a self-promotion piece with a picture that she called Blue Girl. It was a very beautiful drawing of a girl's face. Camel Cigarettes picked this up. Now, Michiko had her name on it, she had her copyright on it, and she had her contact information on the self-promotion piece. Camel Cigarettes took it, took her name off, took her copyright notice off, reversed the thing, photoshopped it into a so-called derivative work,
right,
and put it on a cigarette ad. Now, she had to find the infringement, find a lawyer, take him to court. Her legal expenses would have been, had she had to pay it herself, $100,000. Under Orphan Works, who's going to find a lawyer to sue this to sue a company like this for this kind of abuse? Because under the Orphan Works legislation, you would not have any statutory damages nor legal fees unless you could prove who had created the infringement. So what Michiko would have had to have done under the Orphan Works Bill was not just prove that Camel Cigarettes had infringed her work. That was self-evident. There was no contract from Camel Cigarettes with Michiko saying, we're going to use your work and pay you so much. So it was easy, under current law, it was easy to prove that this was an ipso facto infringement. There was no question about it. The only question was how much was Camel Cigarettes going to have to pay? And could she get a lawyer to keep them in court long enough? Well, since somebody else had to pay, since sooner or later Camels would have to pay, she was able to get a lawyer who put in the time and money to prove that they had taken her name off. They simply got, discovery, which meant that they were allowed to interview under oath the employees of Camel Cigarettes until somebody said, yeah, we photoshopped this out and we reversed this and we did so-and-so. And as a result, the company settled out of court. Under the Orphan Works Bill, you would have to not only prove that the work had been infringed, you would have to prove who infringed it. You would have to prove that somebody at Camel Cigarettes had actually taken that work and infringed it. And unless you could prove that Camel Cigarettes hadn't found it with the name off, you couldn't get a lawyer to take the case.
Yeah, it's a no-win situation.
It is for artists.
And for photographers, anyone who's a creator.
Companies, it's a godsend.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's talk briefly here about who benefits from this legislation.
Well, all the people who want to become commercial registries. This bill was first, the Copyright Office proposal was released in January of '06. Within 2 weeks, every conceivable combination of orphaned works, orphaned art, orphaned photography, orphaned illustration, all these names had been .com'd and snapped up by prospective companies who wanted to make millions in licensing orphaned work. The assumption is that if every work was out there, what's the chances that somebody will get to your work, take your name off, Photoshop your name off, and register the work in your name? Now your job is going to be to prove that they weren't the actual author of your work.
Right. Yeah, so someone else could actually end up owning your work.
Whoever has the money to harvest an enormous amount of work and register it before you can get to it, before you can even find out that they're doing it, will have the prior claim. Now, you may be able to prove that you did the work by providing sketches and so on, but take a work you did 20 years ago. You got the sketches to prove you did that? You got the publication that it appeared in to prove that it ran, with your name under it.
Yeah, or the time to track it
down, or the time and
just
to take
deal
it
with
into federal court, which is what copyright infringement is. It's a federal law. So there are only, I think, 90-some federal courts in the country. You would have to take that to the federal court, to the district court, closest to you, or the one with the best venue. It's not wise to file copyright lawsuits in certain venues because the case law in those district courts can work against you. People who have filed infringement cases have learned that you better venue shop to file. to find out what case to or what court to file a case in. Now, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not speaking here as a legal authority, but I've talked to people who, in fact, Cynthia Turner, who's been working with me on this. Cynthia is actually the one who found the bill and called attention to it in the first place. Cynthia is a medical illustrator who, along with 18 other plaintiffs, were in court for 10 years trying to prove infringement. And in the end, they were able to get enough money to pay their legal fees, but not much more.
Now, is there any limit on how many registries could pop up?
No. No. They're opening this up to the private sector. So presumably, like you remember 20-some years ago, everybody was betting on Betamax rather than VHS as the home video recorder. Well, along come DVDs. So what do you do with all your Betamax recordings? What do you do with all your VHS recordings? You have to, make them, accessible now to DVD recordings. Same thing will happen with registries. Who knows which of the commercial registries that pop up will be the survivors?
Yeah, but in the meantime, every one of them costs us money and rights and ownership.
Well, let's give the government a break on this one. In theory, they could require infringers to go to a maximum of 10 registries to look for your work, and if they can't find it on 10 registries, then they would be free to use it, or 5 registries, or 20.
Yeah, but if there's 1,000 of them,
it doesn't make any difference. They will write this in such a way that if the infringer has done what the infringer is able to call a reasonably diligent search, those are the key words. The infringer is allowed to basically decide for himself when it's been reasonable.
Right. Yeah, I mean it's so obvious that this won't work, that there's so many problems with this.
Well, why don't you ask who wrote the bill?
That's a good question. Who did write the bill?
It was written by 8 law students at American University under the direction of a law professor named Peter Yazzie, J-A-S-Z-I, spelled like in jazzy with an S instead of a Z for the first Z.
Peter Yazzie, okay.
Google Peter Yazzie, J-A-S-Z-I, and authorship, and read the introduction to a book that he wrote several years ago. He wants to overthrow the idea, the romantic idea of authorship. The theory behind this all is that all authorship is a communal activity. In other words, you're influenced by other artists. You may have, been strongly influenced by some people's work. You may have copied somebody else's work. You may have copied ahead from somebody and, drawn the rest of it on your own. You may have stolen a layout from somebody. Therefore, since all creativity in his theory is communal, that ownership should essentially revert to the public domain after a very short license on your behalf. So this was the theory behind, this is where this all came from. I first butted heads with Peter Yazzie, who's a very nice man in person. He's very gracious, very soft-spoken. He's a very, very nice man. But he's been very influenced by this postmodern deconstructionism that came out of France after World War II. I don't even know how to pronounce the names of Jacques Derrida and Michel Foucault, but these two philosophers influenced him a lot. And they're basically Marxist philosophers that believe that individuals don't count for very much in society. It's all the masses. And so the masses are responsible for creativity, and therefore ownership ought to revert to the masses. So in his argument, Yazzie, in the introduction to this book, Mr. Yazzie, Professor Yazzie, argues that legislators should be influenced by this postmodern philosophy and write statutory law to reflect the modern thinking about authorship. And he blames copyright, for example, on the the unseemly vigor of Victor Hugo, the author of Les Miserables and Notre Dame de Paris, better known as the Hunchback of Notre Dame. He blames copyright law on Victor Hugo, who actually is responsible for the International Berne Copyright Convention that most countries follow. And he blames Charles Dickens for his promotion of copyright law by saying Dickens was actually insecure about his own originary thoughts, quote unquote. So he's a very nice man, and one can argue his debatable points in class, but the idea of rewriting copyright law, which is based on international standards, which is based on hundreds of years of business practice, and which is enshrined in copyright-related treaties, such as the so-called TRIPS agreement, TRIPS. You can Google that one too. It stands for Trade-Related Aspects of Intellectual Property, and it's basically an agreement among countries that these countries who trade in intellectual property, or pictures as we would call them, and written work and so on, that these countries agree to abide by certain standards that have passed the test of time. And there's a so-called TRIPS three-step agreement that says that countries can make exceptions to the exclusive right of copyright, but basically only if it doesn't usurp your right to make a profit off your own work. What it does is it gives what we call fair use in the United States to work. And that's what's so deceptive about this bill, because it's being argued that scholars need the right to write term papers, to write scholarly articles, and college students need the right to write term papers. And kids in high school, you don't want a kid in high school sued for infringement because she used one of your pictures in a high school report. Well, I'm sorry, professors, but that's already permissible for use under fair use under the law.
That hasn't changed.
No. In fact, the legislative history of the 1976 Copyright Act says specifically that this will not impede scholars and sub-scholars, such as students, from using this work as fair use. So it's a very deceptive argument to try persuading people that they're in danger, when they write their high school term paper, that they're in danger of copyright infringement and they might be sued by some big bad artist. It won't happen under current law. And it's being used to kind of soft soap people to soft soap legislators into passing this stupid Orphan Works Bill.
Yeah. Now, you've talked to other artist groups. What have some of them told you?
We were the Illustrators Partnership was basically the only group that opposed this thing from the very beginning. A number of groups, such as the Graphic Artists Guild, originally endorsed it as a reasonable solution to the Orphan Works problem. In fact, they suggested that the original proposal written by the 8 law students would have capped infringement fees at $100, which meant that even if you found your work to be infringed and you showed up and said, hey, that's my work, the most you could get would have been $100. That was the original proposal. Now, the Copyright Office, after their so-called year-long study of copyright of Orphan Works legislation, the Copyright Office changed the $100 cap to a so-called reasonable fee. But, of course, the reasonable fee will be set by the user. For example, if I decide that I'm going to sell T-shirts and I'm going to use orphan work and I set $50 as the maximum that I pay for T-shirts, and I use your picture, which, let's say you've done it for a film, and you think that you can, by selling exclusive rights to it, you think you can get $10,000 for use in that film, or $50,000 or whatever. But I find it, and I think I want to use it on a T-shirt. So I use it. I do a reasonable search. I don't find it in one of the registries that I look at, or 2 of the registries, or 5, or whatever. So I use it on the T-shirt. Now it's your job. It's your job to locate your infringements wherever it might occur, anywhere in the world at any time. So you'd have to start monitoring other registries to find out whether anything you've ever done has been infringed on any particular day, in any particular publication, in any particular country. So that'll be the first thing you can do every day. You can check the registries to see whether your work's been infringed overnight.
10,000 pieces of art that I've got on there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Then you go to the infringer. Now your job is to track the infringer down and get him to reply. You have to find out where he lives, what his company is, look up his number. You have to find him. He only has to do a reasonable search to find you, and if he doesn't find it, he can use your work. But if you want to get paid, you have to find him for sure. No reasonable search necessary there. You have to absolutely find him. Then you have to get him to reply. And then he says, well, I pay $50. Well, if that's not acceptable to you, then back you go to federal court to try to get your rights back and to prove that he infringed your work. Well, this was the proposal the Graphic Artists Guild called reasonable and endorsed. So if you look at the actual Orphan Works study, the Graphic Artists Guild is mentioned in there several times. We got 42 groups together, both from the United States and abroad, to oppose the bill. We didn't get mentioned in the Orphan Works study by some funny coincidence, even though it was signed by 42 international groups. We got mentioned in the appendix as 42 groups that opposed the bill. But in the actual Orphan Works study, the Graphic Artists Guild is cited several times. In fact, the Graphic Artists Guild suggested that if artists didn't pick up their copyright fees after a period of a couple years, at a time to be decided by the Copyright Office, then the money should revert to either the Copyright Office, the National Endowment for the Humanities, or a group that represented the rights holders in the field in which the orphan work came from, like maybe the Graphic Artists Guild. So they endorsed the bill originally. Then after the bill came out and they saw how much opposition there was, they switched sides. There were several groups like that. They weren't the Guild wasn't the only one. And in their defense, one could easily say that a lot of people, when this bill was introduced, believed it actually would only affect old work. We pointed out very early on, in fact, before the Orphan Work study began, we pointed out that the problem with determining orphan work is that if the work is not marked, in other words, if you don't have a copyright C and your name on everything you do, there's no way to tell when it was created or what country it came from. And that would apply for any work that was done internationally, because that kind of marking and copyright symbol is not required in the rest of the world. So this would infringe not only American work, but European work and work from Asia, from South America, everywhere. As I said when I testified before the Senate last time, the inability to track unmarked work is the Achilles heel of the Orphan Works Bill. If a work is unmarked and unregistered, there's simply no way to source it. And so basically everything gets caught in an Orphan Works net, which is exactly what's happening with this bill. The last time around, 2 years ago, when the bill was first introduced, we were able to stop it with arguments like that. At first, the Copyright Office said there would be no problem. Now, after we were able to stall the bill in the House Judiciary Committee last time, now this time around they concede that there's a problem, but they've said these commercial registries will be the solution to the problem. So basically they say to the Congress, let's pass the bill before summer. They want this bill fast-tracked. They introduced it about a month ago. They were supposed to have released the bill itself a couple days ago. We haven't seen it so far. They've held what I believe to be about 1 hour of hearings on it with 4 witnesses. And they want to get it passed as fast as possible, we think before summer.
You know, the one thing I can tell anyone who's going to be listening to this is follow the money. Mm-hmm. Find out who's making money from this, who's getting payments. That's why this is being fast-tracked.
Yes.
And in fact, one of the things in the article that probably led people to this is, there's 2 reasons why this is happening: apathy and money. And a lot of artists are apathetic and don't get out of their studios, and their ass sits in a chair, and they think, well, someone else will deal with it. And the money is, well, the big corporations or any group that's going to put these registries together that will make a ton of money. Well, they're the ones giving money to the government, who's turning around and saying, sure, we'll pass this for you.
Exactly.
Follow the money, and you'll realize why this is happening and why we're about to lose the rights to everything we've ever created.
Well, I'm a good example of apathy. If you had asked me 10 years ago to explain copyright law, I couldn't have explained a lick of it. As I said, we formed a kind of a neighborhood watch group because nobody else was doing what needed to be done. And so we've had to bone up on all this stuff. I'm a perfect example of apathy. Most of my career, I didn't pay attention to any of this kind of stuff, so I understand why artists don't want to pay attention to it. But I'm saying this: if you've never paid attention to copyright law in your life, this is a good time to start because the changes that are happening to copyright law right now will affect the way you do work for the rest of your career and how artists who come after us will do their work. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to lose everything you've ever done or everything you ever do, or to start paying a hell of a lot of money to start protecting it on a regular basis. You'd have to start paying protection money to a bunch of commercial entities who don't even exist right now. Google has given millions of dollars to Stanford. It's a some sort of group at Stanford University. I don't know if they actually gave it to the university itself, but to a group that is sponsored or housed at Stanford. Google gave $2 million to fight copyright law. We've been told that Google has given money to the Copyright Office. I'm not sure of the details. But companies like this want to be big players. Here, look at it this way. For most of the time that we've done work, our secondary rights were not worth a great deal to people. You did a picture for a magazine 10 years ago. It was, well, 20 years ago, certainly. It was almost considered unethical to ever use that picture again. Well, all of a sudden, along came computers and search engines, and now there are fortunes to be made, as Getty and Corbis have proved. I mean, who had ever heard of Corbis 10 years ago? I mean, of Getty 10 years ago. Getty was just sold for $2.8 billion, and I'll guarantee you that no photographer got a dollar of all that money.
Right. And for those who don't know Getty, it's a huge grouping and collection of clip art and clip photos.
Mm-hmm. Well, there are two competitors, Getty and Corbis. Corbis is owned privately by Bill Gates. Both of these companies are losing money. Both of them have spent millions or billions to start buying up small mom-and-pop stock agencies, which sell work, license work, and so on. I won't get into their business practices, which I think are not good. But let's say that they're capturing the clients of artists who used to do work for clients by selling work at prices a great deal lower than artists once used to get for their work. Getty and Corbis have hired a lobbyist and are in there negotiating with the Copyright Office to get the most advantageous terms they can get out of this Orphan Works Bill. They have a very, very good lobbyist. He's an extremely good lawyer. But he will not disclose what Getty and Corbis are negotiating for, what they're asking for, what they expect to get out of these negotiations. But he's been advising artists not to bother fighting this bill because it can't be beat.
That's a nice
he's got a stake in our not beating it. His clients want to be able to drive artists and photographers out of business, or at least drive them so far out of business that they have to work for Getty and Corbis under work-for-hire agreements. In effect, they see a world in which we're moving into the information age, and who controls content will make an awful lot of money. I mean, everybody knows that prices for stock illustration have traditionally been quite low. But you have to know that Bill Gates and Mark Getty, two of the world's richest men, are not going into this to make a little extra money on the side.
Yeah.
If Bill Gates and Mark Getty are moving into territories, you know that these guys smell huge amounts of money there. So what their goal is in the information age to become the Ford and GM of visual content. And the only thing they need to do is to drive out all the small businesses the same way Ford and GM drove out all the small car manufacturers back in the 20s and 30s. You go back to the original car business, it was, a bunch of guys building cars in their garages. And along came these two big car companies, and they were able to drive everybody out and unionize the business so that everybody became workers in these car plants. Well, I'm sorry to say it, but Getty and Corbis plan to make everybody essentially art workers in their visual art factories. You'd have to work at home and so on, but you would be working under work-for-hire agreements. So they have a big stake in all this. Now, of course, they would want to license the work. Google wants to be able to give free access to the work. Google makes their money by selling ads, so they want to be able to provide as much visual content as possible. So Getty and Corbis would actually be opposed to the Orphan Works Bill unless they can structure it in such a way that it benefits them.
Right.
Which is what they're trying to do with their lobbyist. But you can bet that they're not in there fighting for the rights of independent artists. So what we have done is we have hired a very good attorney, a man who was legal advisor to the Congress when they wrote the 1976 Copyright Act. We've brought together 12 visual arts groups in the United States that represent medical illustrators, general science illustrators, architectural illustrators, the Society of Illustrators from Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Diego, Washington, D.C., Pittsburgh, the Society of Illustrators. We've brought all of these different groups together, and we have hired an attorney. We've partnered with groups representing fine artists in both the United States and Europe. We're having a conference call this week to talk with textile designers to see how we can work with them on this. And what we're going to need is widespread support in a couple of weeks to the next month or two. This is going to have to happen fast, and it's going to have to happen very effectively when we do it, because we're going to have to try to put pressure on Congress to either stop or drastically limit this bill in some way that it actually affects only the kind of work that they really want to make available to libraries and museums. And there's a simple way to do this. Canada has already done it. They have an Orphan Works board in which the Canadian government, if you want to use an orphan work, you go to the Canadian Orphan Works board, and they research the work. They determine whether it is, in fact, an orphan work, and if it is, you get a license to use the work. There's no reason in this world why the United States couldn't set up something similar to the Canadian Orphan Works Board. It would solve the problem they're trying to solve, and it would leave everybody else free to go about making money doing their own work.
Yeah, well, stop theft. I mean, I look at this straight out, it's theft. They're stealing our creations.
Yes, exactly.
So, I mean,
in fact, I wrote that to the government last summer. I said it will create an entire class of single-party transactions. Under current law, you have to know that somebody's using your work, and they have to know that it's your work they're using. You call that a double-party transaction. Money changes hands for the use, or some service changes hands for the use. In other words, you get what you want or what you can get out of the transaction. This bill will create a class of single-party transactions in which the user will know that he uses your work, but you may never find out about it. And what that does is it completely devalues your exclusive right to copyright. Remember, copyright is an exclusive right. It means that you own it, and only you can determine how it is used, when it is used, whether it is used. This bill will essentially do away with your exclusive right of copyright. It will become public property unless you go out and claim it. Think about that.
Yeah, but even then, there's so many exclusions of people being able to get around that that it's virtually impossible for you even to maintain it, the ownership, even if you're doing everything you should be doing.
Yes. As we pointed out the other day, even if you register your work with the Copyright Office, it won't protect it from infringement. It'll just give you a piece of paper to go around the world tracking down infringements and trying to drag them into court. So, I mean, the idea of registries is nonsense because they won't be effective. I mean, unless the registries, are empowered by the government to create a copyright police force or a copyright bureau of investigation, it's up to you to track down infringements just like it is right now. The only difference is, at least under the current law, you have an incentive to track down an infringer, which is the statutory damages that are available to you if you have registered your work. Under the Orphan Works Law, you will still have that right, but you will have to prove the infringement, and you will have to assure yourself in advance that the infringer will not be able to assert an Orphan Works defense successfully. And they could easily do that by saying, hey, I found this picture and it didn't have any name on it, so I used it. Hey, I checked 5 registries, it wasn't in there, so I'm safe.
Yeah, the new legislation literally outlines how they can get away with it.
Mm-hmm. Well, it will. Now we have to say we haven't seen the new legislation. We've seen the old legislation. The information that I've been giving you has been based on conversations with the chairman of the House Subcommittee on Intellectual Property, who will be overseeing the bill, with the legislative aides to the chairman and ranking member of the Senate, to the heads of the Copyright Office. So the information I've been giving you is based on what we know, based on what they've told us the bill will say.
Right.
But we haven't actually seen the bill, so we can't start writing letters right now. That's the first thing. Everybody who hears this wants to write a letter today. Well, we can't ask you to write a letter today, because until the bill is out, until we've seen the actual language, until the bill has a number to refer to, Congressman won't pay any attention to your letters. And when it comes out, we will especially need the attention of people in California and Pennsylvania, because the senators and congressmen in those states are on important committees, also possibly North Carolina. The senators and congressmen in those particular states are particularly powerful in the committees that will be hatching this bill. So we will need the support of people in those particular states again: North Carolina, Pennsylvania, possibly New York, and certainly California. Maybe others as we identify them, but those are key states right now. So we will need, especially as much active participation in opposing this bill as we can from people everywhere, but particularly in those states, also possibly Vermont.
Now, how can people get onto your email list so that they can be notified?
The best way is to email. If you got a pencil, take down this name. Illustrators Partnership is one name, just like it sounds, with no apostrophe anyplace. One word, Illustrators Partnership, at CNY, like in Clown, New York, mail.com. Illustrators Partnership at cnymail.com. And if you send your name and say, please add us to the please add my name to the Orphan Works email list, we will send this to you. These emails we've been posting on the Illustrators Partnership website, which is illustratorspartnership.org. And we have an Orphan Works resource page where you can go and read all the stuff that we wrote last time about the bill, that has a history of the bill, that has a background on the bill. But we will particularly have to start writing all new stuff as this bill comes out. So do try to follow this if you can, because your participation is going to be critical in trying to do something about it. And we are getting wide support from fine artists and textile designers and so on.
Well, you should be getting support from every single person who's ever had a creative bone in their body. Now, one thing I want to mention real quick, we don't need answers to these, but it's something that I found very important, that earlier on you had asked the House Subcommittee on Intellectual Property a number of questions, such as, who's to be trusted with these valuable databases? Why should we be forced to entrust our creative inventory to a private company and risk losing all of our rights? What happens when the registry is hacked? What happens when it's acquired by someone else? What happens when their terms of service change and we've already given them our money? What if we can't afford to maintain our work in all the different registries that come out? Have you been given any answers to these questions?
No. No, their answers are the private sector will take care of it all. We got an amazing answer from the head of the Copyright Office 3 years ago when we were, having a private meeting with them. They told us that when we listed all the objections to this bill about how it will, not just the abuses that will come from actual infringers, but the outright abuses of theft that will be justified as Orphan Works uses. In which cases you'll be obligated to prove that it was actual theft. And they said, we think people will obey the law. Well, since when has the government ever made laws based on the presumption that people will obey the laws? It was James Madison, I think, in Federalist 51 that said if people were angels, there'd be no need for governments. So the idea that we just have to trust people to obey the law after you pass this law is crazy. I'll say one other thing. It is against the International Berne Copyright Convention and against the copyright-related treaties such as TRIPS for any country to impose registration. This is why foreign countries are incensed about this, because the bill is almost clearly a violation of Berne. The United States is trying to get around it by saying, well, we're not actually saying you have to register the work. We're only telling people they can use your work if it's not registered. So it's a de facto infringement, but because they're not actually legislating the registries, they claim they're not in violation of international copyright law.
God, it's so...
well, it's
so frustrating.
It's sophistry at best.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously that's the case. I mean, you don't have any rights unless you register, but we're not making you register.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's such a bullshit line. That kind of stuff really annoys me.
Well, to answer that, the head of the let me see if I can never get his title exactly correctly. He was Associate Register for Policy and International Relations or something like that. But anyway, he was the principal author of the Orphan Works Bill. He has now moved on to Microsoft, which testified in favor of the bill.
Yeah, gee, I wonder why.
When asked about this, when asked about this, he said, illustrators have never gotten together and created a collective mechanism to protect their work. Well, the law didn't say they had to, did it? So since they haven't done it, we've just concluded that that getting artists to do this kind of thing is like herding cats, and you can't herd cats, but you can move their food. So he's saying, in effect, that since artists haven't gotten together and created these collective registries by themselves, the government is going to essentially strip them of their rights to force them to subscribe to other people's registries. Well, I'm sorry, but who in the hell is the former associate register of the Copyright Office? To work in the Copyright Office for a couple of years. He was in private practice when I first met him back in 2000 at the law firm. Well, I won't mention the law firm's name, but it was a law firm in Washington. Ironically, he was one of the lawyers who helped set up the Illustrators Partnership. So he knew that we were trying to do something to protect artists' rights back then. And in effect, he used Illustrators specifically as an example by saying, well, you've had several years to do all this stuff to protect your rights, and you haven't done it, so it's time to remove all the rights from your work.
Well, and it goes beyond even that. I mean, what they're doing, they're turning around something that there's a reason that we didn't want big registries, is because it can be hacked and there's problems with it and things like that. So it's not that we haven't. Most artists don't want to be part of something like that. So they're actually they're twisting reality.
Exactly.
It's such a spin job on this for their own gains.
Remember that it was written by a group of academic Marxists who believe that somehow authorship has been highly overvalued over the years, that the community really creates your work. Let's say you go out and draw a tree. According to the academics who wrote this law, that tree is somehow, that your drawing of that tree is somehow owed to all the artists who ever came before you. And so therefore it should be public property after you have a license on it for a couple of years.
Well, here's my argument against that, because that's basically saying that there's no value to the intrinsic value to the artwork. Well, if there's no intrinsic value, no one else would want it. And by virtue of the fact that they're trying to change the law so everyone can have it, that tells you that there's an intrinsic value.
Bingo.
And of course that has value.
You've hit exactly the point we've been making over the last couple of years. They're trying to argue that unless you register the work, it proves you have no commercial interest in it, and therefore it should be public property. And my argument has been exactly what you just made, that if somebody wants to use it, it has value ipso facto. So therefore, I do have a commercial interest in it. Let's say you've got 1,000 pictures, 10,000 pictures you've never registered, including sketches in your sketchbook. They may never be worth anything to you, but if somebody wants it, what are you going to do? Say, oh, you can have it for free? Well, you might. It's up to you to decide. But if somebody wants it and they have, and it's it's a commercial client of some kind, well, of course you're going to ask for money. I did a book jacket for Frank Herbert, one of the Dune trilogy back in, I don't know, the 80s sometime, when it came out as a book. Mm-hmm. Well, no one's asked for use that picture for years. But all of a sudden somebody wanted to republish one of the Dune books and they wanted to use it again, so suddenly it had value again. What am I going to do? Did I have to register that work because somebody might want to use it again sometime? According to the Orphan Works Bill, I would have to.
Right, and then hope to God that that's the registry that they go to look for it.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's so many problems with this. Well, I'll tell you what, all this done is inflame me. And hopefully we're inflaming other people too. I mean, we really want to get them out there. I'll have the information in the article and on the website as far as where people can send emails to get on your Orphan Works list.
Listen, if you would send us a link to the interview, we will post the link in one of our emails if you'd like.
Absolutely. I'm going to get this out as many places, and I'll forward you everything. The article should be coming out in AWN as soon as I can get it out to them.
Great.
This week. So
great. Well, thank you.
I really appreciate
I appreciate your interest in spreading the word on this. We need more people like you.
Well, and thank you for all the work that you're doing, because you're really protecting our lives.
There's a whole team of us. This isn't a one or two person thing. Cynthia Turner and I have been doing most of the visible work on this, but there's a whole crew of people working with us on this, and they've been very, very supportive. I've been in the business since Lyndon Johnson was president, and I have never seen people rally around the way they did last time. The last time the senators and congressmen were shutting off their fax machines because they were getting overloaded with faxes. And by the way, we use faxes rather than emails because it's easy to delete emails. Once those things start crawling through the fax machine, people pay attention. So.
Well, I also have a link in the article, and I'll have it on the site as well. There's a really, really simple way of getting mailing addresses, emails, and phone numbers of every senator, legislator, and representative.
Very good.
It's so easy to get to now, so I'm including all that. One click. I want everyone to be able to get to everyone that they need to make their voices heard.
Good work.
All right.
Thank
you much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, bye.
All right, bye.